So we should come to order, and I appreciate everybody doing this. I know we have our regular meeting next week, but Carrie, I think your suggestion about kind of taking this offline is probably prudent. As I said, the good news is we only have 2 agenda items, but they're pretty meaty. So, Larry, I know you support the town in terms of looking at some of the obligations. So Carrie, my thought is we kind of let Larry walk through what he wants to walk through, and then certainly you're more than welcome to stay, Larry. Otherwise, we'll move on to our next agenda item.
Okay.
Does that sound good, Carrie?
Sure. We should do a roll call vote to open the meeting. Just that's the Zoom requirement or virtual meeting requirement.
Okay. How do we do that?
So, yeah, you just call on each of the members to acknowledge their presence.
Okay. Yeah. Gavin Morrissey, are you here?
I am here.
Christine Brennan.
I'm here.
Jenny Baldino.
I'm here.
Rick Miller.
I'm here.
And Linda, I know you're our observer. Can you hear us?
Muted.
I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. So let it be recorded. So again, 2 agenda items tonight. One is we've talked a lot in previous meetings about at least providing an advisory role to some of the funds that the town has set aside for future obligations. And I think Larry's going to kind of talk us through it. And then the second piece is Carrie has something I'm appreciative for, put together a lot of the documents for an RFP looking for a new fund manager. As we talked about in previous meetings, the approach we had discussed is combining the 2 in the RFP with the idea that maybe we might end up getting a better deal out of it at the end of the day. Again, no commitment's been made, and I think we all know this will be a bit of a journey. But again, to take this offline, I think is very helpful. So Larry, Carrie's kind of taken us through kind of the general outlines, and certainly if anybody has any particular questions, jump right in. But I'm not sure if you just had a couple of things you wanted to lay out to begin with.
Sure. Since it's really, I'm not exactly sure what you want, but so if I'm going in the wrong direction, give me a nudge.
Absolutely.
So on the retirement system, the town is actually one of the best funded retirement systems in the Commonwealth, in the public sector. They are, the obligation is, hold on, that's on my second page. What they've really sort of obligated on based on service that's already happened is about $200 million. But they have, of that, they have over $180 million as of the last valuation date. So that's as of 1/1/20. So this is, they're not even, very few systems are even close. Some of them even are below 50%. So there's no real urgency to make them 100% funded. But it's sort of, that is sort of the overall goal.
Yeah, so you brought a couple numbers there that I'm not sure if I saw. I saw numbers like the obligation is 50 million and
that's the Opeb one.
Okay.
That's those are the ones that Carrie provided you, I think,
yep.
Which are that's like page 4 of the ones which I sent today.
Correct.
But the second page is the one for the retirement system. And that is the 200 million. And that's composed of about pretty equally between actives and retired people. So now, just to give you a, as I said, many systems are 50% or less. And then if you look through the country, you have situations where, it's 10, 20% funded, even a few like down around 3%, like Illinois and New Jersey are just disastrous. And I think West Virginia, maybe Kentucky are just disastrous. So the town has this pretty well under control in terms of the amount that they're contributing each year and their overall, their asset allocation is, which I included in that. So I don't think that's significantly changed, but overall, it's probably someplace around 50% stock, domestic stock. So let's call them probably 65% of regular sort of equities, and then the remainder in stocks, in bonds, and so 65 and a little bit more, 67, 68. So it's like 2/3 in equities. So that's actually a relatively conservative. Nowadays, that would be considered a conservative allocation. It used to be that it's 60-40, 60% equities, 40% bonds was sort of the golden sort of standard. And now you're starting to see, as you know, bonds have been, at least the yield on the bonds have been relatively unattractive for quite a while now. You've been seeing people reached for really 80% or even more, like 80% equities or an alternative investments, et cetera, you know, hedge funds, private equity. So you're really, this is actually what is nowadays considered I would consider it a conservative allocation, asset allocation.
My recollection, Carrie, is that these are invested in pretty blunt instruments. Like is there a portfolio manager now, or is this?
Yes, there is. So Larry, for the purposes of this discussion, they're looking at the pension reserve fund that has about $10 million.
The old 578 or chapter 578 or whatever that was.
Right. So the retirement system is an independent,
right,
and distinct entity, and those assets that he is referring to are under the jurisdiction of the retirement board, and
right.
the retirement board does have an investment advisor. The town has a pension reserve fund with a balance of about $10 million. And it was invested by one of the former investment managers that the retirement system had, but it is an asset of the town, and the purpose of this fund is to smooth the assessment increases to the town. But now that we are approaching the end of our funding schedule, we probably can pull more from this pension reserve than we have, because we've got $10 million. We have 8 years theoretically left on the funding schedule,
Right.
and we've been pulling about $700,000 a year.
Oh.
We need a strategy, both an investment strategy and a cash flow or usage strategy. So that's what we're.
Carrie, does that mean that the pension reserve fund is used to fund the pension fund and to help fill the gap? Is that what I understood?
Yes. Yes, it's used to pay a portion of the annual assessment.
So, I mean, if we were just to roll it right in, then the pension net liability, the pension fund would be short 10 million instead of 20. Is that right? Is that what I understood?
Yes.
Yes, but we probably wouldn't want to do that, because we will receive an annual assessment from the retirement system.
Understood. I'm not advocating that. I'm just trying to understand sort of, there's a sense in which if you try to understand the full funding position of the town, right, it's even better than it looks.
Right. Yes. And the advantage of that is that it sort of, in some ways, it's sort of interesting because even though you're very close to full funding, there was actually a point many years ago, quite a bit before 2008, I believe, where we were within a year, 2 years of actually being fully funded. So there's still quite a bit of risk, even though this is a relatively conservative portfolio. Still, you have someplace, let's say 2/3 of, so the $120 million, which is in equity-like instruments. So have another year like 2008, or if we happen to be talking about an end of the fiscal year of March 30th instead, this, we could have had, something which looks like 100 and, let's say that would be, $36 million loss or something like that. And so you have the advantage of being able to smooth it out by using that, as opposed to just, so my sense would be that money should be more conservatively invested than the rest of the funds, because it's being used to sort of smooth the differences as opposed to trying to earn the maximum return, would be my feelings about it. Otherwise it would just, if you rolled it in, it would just be, part of the corpus of the funds and probably allocated into that in the same manner. And now I'm not really privy to how that's invested, the reserve fund, and how is that currently being invested?
Oh, it's
Is that legal list?
a 60-40 split, which again is maybe too aggressive for the purpose of the fund.
Right. That's sort of the style, what you have to look at, return versus risk. And I would say, from my point of view, from what I'm listening here and thinking about it, is I would say that, little risk might be meaningful. The difficulty with having these very large corpus of funds, the $180 million, which is probably closer to $200 million now, and then then the money which is from in the other one in the which is right now about 21 million, or it was 21 million for the Opeb fund, but will be eventually, if things work out the way it is, probably closer to $75 million. I'm figuring that $50 million liability will grow too. So all of a sudden you're going to have something which looks like easily $300 million in these two funds eventually.
So Carrie, just for us to understand, you're only asking us to take on an advisory role for the part of the fund that's the reserve fund?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Which is about
And the
32.
OPEB fund.
Yeah.
And so, Larry, I think it would be helpful if you just talked about OPEB a little bit, like what is it?
Okay.
Where are we?
Yeah.
In terms of, what's our strategy and the change in the discount rate and blah, blah.
Okay. That's always a good one. Yes. Right now, it's other post-employment, OPEB stands for other post-employment benefits. And what that is mainly medical insurance for retirees, but it does include other sort of benefits such as life insurance. And if you provide dental for retirees that the town contributes to, or vision or other things, that would also be included. But for you, it's medical and life insurance. So in that for years was just paid on a pay-as-you-go basis. So as the premiums came due for the employees, you would just pay it. And so then GASB, basically the Accounting Standards Board for governmental units, have said that look, that you're putting on this large liability, you're making promises and you're not measuring it at all. So they started saying you have to put it in. So that means that not only the liability that's associated with the current retirees, but you also have to put in something for the active people, because you're promising them now that you're going to have to pay them, you're going to give them something which is very valuable years later. So if you really think of this as maybe more of a deferred compensation plan, that once they retire, it becomes it gets paid out, but it gets paid out over time. But the thing about what's very unique about the OPEB plan is that, like in a retirement plan, something that you pay out 20 years from now isn't very costly because you get to discount it for many years. For OPEB, you actually, the trouble is that the medical trend, inflation for medical inflation has been very, very high. So that we've had, years where, this X-ray, which is now costs $100, well, it would cost $120 the next year. And then 20 years from now, you would expect it at that rate, it would be like $1,000. So you have these incredibly inflation, high increase. So that's why they say you have to go through, in particular, that you're looking at the active liability, you have to measure it and you have to put it in. So then there's no obligation to actually have to fund it, but there's certain incentives in terms of what your financial statement looks like to actually fund it. And now it used to be that nobody funded it. And now I'd say well over half of the municipalities are starting to fund this. Now, once again, Concord is sort of ahead of the pack on that too, that most places are funding at a very low rate, maybe $100,000 or so a year. And where I don't really remember what it is exactly, but hold on, let me sort of see.
The annual contribution?
Yeah, I think I just found it.
Yeah,
They're contributing about $1.8 million in cash, plus, whoops. Oh, how did I do that? I minimized you. Well, I don't really need to see you. But anyway, wow.
Looks like the contribution was almost 4 million.
Yes, it is.
Oh,
That's
that
some
was
of
pay
that
as you
is
go.
yeah, that's really the value of the benefits that you're paying to the retirees.
Got
the
it.
Cost to it, and that's actually a little complicated thing, which I'll just mention. But basically, the active people sort of subsidize some of, and the town, the active people actually subsidize some of the retirees, because if you think about it, a 20-year-old in the plan will pay the same premium as an 80-year-old who's in the same plan. It's not age-based, but the cost of medical claims for that 80-year-old is actually very much higher than what it would be for the 20-year-old. So there's actually sort of a cross-subsidization from the actives to the retirees, and that's included there in that $4 million. But the real key thing is that they're contributing, that the town is contributing about $1.8 million in cash. And that's actually like, extremely, really way ahead of the pack in terms of the municipalities in Massachusetts. There's really very few places that are doing that. And, and it's really going to show. It's, for example, like in the retirement system, typically, like I was thinking about Arlington, because I know that offhand, like they would be paying $20 million out in retirement benefits, but they're only contributing 10 million because they've now done the pre-funding. And so that's the same thing. This will go a long way towards stabilizing the cost for Concord. So they're really doing a great job of that. So as we said, the liability is about $60 million, and you have about $21 million right now. Now, how we measure that? We're assuming a discount rate of about 6.5%, and that's probably, probably a fairly realistic one. I would say that we might even go a little lower, because that was actually based as of 1/1/18, 1/1/20. No, when was that? I'm sorry, that's a 1/1/19 valuation. We use that rate. So, and actually, if you weren't funding like that on your financial statement, we would have actually had to use a discount rate of like 2.21%, which is extremely low and would basically blow this thing up. It wouldn't look like $59 million. It would really look like, more than double that.
And that's the power of time. With a longer horizon, you're more comfortable going with a higher rate.
Well, yeah, well, it isn't a question of what I'm really comfortable. The GASB has this requirement that says that you have to do this sort of cash flow analysis, and sort of if you would run out of money, you end up having to use a 20-year bond rate, municipal bond rate, which is 2.21%. So if you had no money in there, you would actually have to use that. And so a lot of systems I work with now are using 2.2, 2.5. Some of them are completely unfunded, so they're using 2.21. I only have a handful of clients that are getting to use the 6.5%. But that's also based because of the commitment to continuing funding too. So so they're doing they're really definitely ahead of the curve on this. So when we figure out the 6.5%, that's really based on the asset allocation and the expected rates of return. I did put those in there, and we used the expected rate of returns from PRIT, the state system, because they're pretty good, responsible projector, I would say. So if the ones which I show you are real rates of return, so those are with inflation stripped out of it. So you would actually take those results and multiply them by 1.025. You would take, like, if you had a 4.1, one of them is like 4.1%, and just to adjust it, you would take 1.041 and multiply it by 1.025, the inflation rate. Or if you want to do it simpler, just add them together. So it's, it would be a little more than 6.6% would be the expected return on the domestic stocks. So given those, the 6.5% is actually a little aggressive. So it might be that we look at this and we sort of say, this is actually maybe something that we'll actually want to lower, and that will increase the liability. The liability is, when we do an actuarial valuation, that's really just a budget in a sense. We're projecting what we think this is going to be. It's not really the benefits or whatever, the benefits that you eventually pay out of it. We're just sort of trying to say, okay, this is a reasonable representation of what that you're going to have to pay for. So I would say that it's probably, in the long term, maybe we'll actually end up having to raise that liability a little more. I think that will happen. So one of the nice things, though, about the the way this is being done is that, unlike the pension plan or even the pension reserve plan, the Opeb plan doesn't have any liquidity issues, because we're in an accumulation phase. where the retirement system and the retirement reserve is that you pay things out annually. You know, like Kerry said, you know, you're paying like the $700,000 out from the pension reserve to the town to pay for the contribution. Where this, though, we're not expected to really take money out of this fund for like quite a number of years. Let's say 10, 15, 20 years. So there is some possibility to be a little bit more aggressive in terms of the allocation. You know, you probably don't want to slam it all in at once, but you know, I'm not an asset consultant, but that you probably don't want to, you probably want to do it over a period of time, but it could actually use be a little more aggressive because you really do have a long time horizon.
Have there any ever been disbursements out of this, or this has just been the piggy bank all along?
It's just piggy bank, but it's not really been, it hasn't been for that many years that this has existed. Probably, you know, less than 10.
2009, I think it was established.
I'm sorry.
So-
I think it was established in 2009.
Yeah, that would be about, I was
So-
gonna say 10 years, you know.
So the idea is that we're going to do this pay as you go, right? For until when? And then this fund is supposed to take over? Is that it?
Yes, yes, but now there's actually a period of time where, you know, there is the possibility, let's say the town ran into some really tough times, right? And there was, you know, let's say, and they really couldn't balance their budget, right? There is the possibility that they could go and take the two or so $1 million of the pay as you go, and they could actually take the money out of this. It's in an irrevocable trust, so that it can only be used for the purpose in which it's entitled, which would be for paying retirement OPEB benefits. But you know, you could actually say, well, we're not going to contribute this year. I have one client that's actually done that because because of COVID, they're hurting sort of badly. So they are not going to make any, they were making very aggressive contributions to this. And now this year, they're not going to make any contribution, and they're going to instead pay you money out of it to pay for the benefits. So, but in general, the intent right now is to just continue on until we get closer to full funding, and then it will take over. And then, you know, the town won't have this obligation anymore.
Yeah. How do other towns manage the OPEB money? Do they have a separate committee? Is it the finance committee?
Okay, there's two different ways that are done. Usually the treasurer has the obligation. There's one I know that it's a little different because they were under a home rule petition as opposed to the chapter you're using. So a lot of them have hired asset consultants to do that. I would actually there is a couple of them, quite a number of them, particularly the smaller ones, that they really can't afford to have an asset consultant because they just don't have enough money in there. You know, when you have $1 million or something like that, it just doesn't, asset consultants really are, you know, aren't really worthwhile. They're going to charge you a lot for that. So because they would have to do almost the same amount of work for $1 million as they're going to do for $10 million. Yeah. Maybe even more, because you know there's lots of things that you can't get into for when you have a small amount of corpus of funds. So a lot of those have used PRIT, which is the Pension Reserve Investment Trust, which is what the state puts their money in for retirement system, and actually they also manage their OPEB fund. So that there are some advantages to putting it into PRIT, in that they are, you know, extraordinary, you know, they're a huge fund. They're, you know, 700 some odd, $70 billion or something like that. And so they get, very good rates. They can get into contribute things which you can't possibly get into, in terms of private equity and in terms of hedge funds and other things. And they can have professional management on that. I don't really recommend hedge funds for most people, or private equity, that wouldn't make sense. And actually the retirement system has, I think about, what is it, $40 million in there? $47 million in the trust fund based from the last valuation.
Has Concord thought about just putting the OPEB money into PRIT? I assume there's pluses and minuses.
Right. There's local control. A lot of people don't like that. It's also they invest the theory. It's very aggressively allocated because that's what the state wants. They don't give you a choice. They don't say, we want to use 60-40. No, you use whatever they want. And I've talked to them any number of times about that they should offer some various models. They should have like a more conservative model for those systems that want. It's not really about getting the best return. It's like best return. You really want to get your best return for the risk that you want to take. And so in my mind, it has lots of advantages, but the disadvantages is the loss of local control and also the asset allocation. And now, Carrie, I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, I would agree with you. As Larry said, the retirement system does invest some of its money through PRIT, but they traditionally are more aggressive. Their portfolio is more aggressive than what we maintain locally.
Understood.
Yeah, I did have one system that I did. They were just so incredibly poorly managed that I wrote them a letter saying, you got to go into PRIT or you got to get some professional management because they were just doing it themselves and it was just a disaster.
So Carrie, it sounds like the PRIT fund is more aggressive than what we do with all of our other funds. It is, okay.
Yeah, they are like, I would call them about 80% in equity-like instruments.
Oh, okay. That's more aggressive, yeah.
Can I just make sure that I understand the landscape here? Because there's been a lot. And so I just want to understand. So we have our pension fund. Then we have the pension reserve fund, which has about 10 million in it. That pension reserve fund we use if we need to for distributions, right? But we don't really need that because we have the 184 for pensions right now.
So
of the 200.
So for pensions, the retirement system is an independent
right
agency. On an annual basis, they provide an assessment to each of their members.
Okay.
And we use a portion of the pension reserve to smooth the increase in the pension assessment for budgetary purposes.
Okay, great. All right. So the pension is the independent, trust. It runs its own money. Then we have the town money, which is the reserve fund that we use when we get assessed for an assessment from the pension. And then we also have this OPEB or OPB fund, which is for the other employee benefits after employment benefits like health, eye care, things like that, dental, whatever there may be, that we pay along the way to fund for future obligations.
Yes.
Okay. And just to understand, what I thought I heard Rick say is once that gets fully funded, it would roll into the pension trust or?
No.
Okay, so
No,
that's
you would start using it to pay for the retirement benefits instead of the town paying for it.
Got it. So we're paying as we go for the benefits, but we're also putting money into this
Right.
OPB so that that can get funded.
Yes, you're putting in the OPEB trust.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I get the landscape now. I just want to make sure I had all the pieces.
Yeah, one of the things about that reserve fund is that, you're contributing about $6 million to roughly between $6 and $7 million for the pension trust. But there is some potential to have real discontinuities on that, because as I mentioned, let's say you have $200 million and then you get that 30% loss. So all of a sudden you're talking about maybe, a $60 million loss, and you have till basic, you would have let's say probably about 18 years to amortize that. So it would be, that would increase your pension liability by, your contribution by $3, $4, $5 million a year. If that actually occurred, it would be, so having that is like really very, very, very helpful.
Well, would that occur even if you're fully funded, or if you're fully funded at that point, would you go into an insurance contract?
No. On the retirement side, they don't do that. No, you can't. The obligation is really the town. See, we're assuming when we call you fully funded, that would be at 6.75%. We're assuming. But if you went to an insurance contract, you'd probably have to have 2-3 times the amount of money right now.
Right. So I guess my point is
rate of 2%, 3%.
Yeah. So even if you are in a sense fully funded, even if we had 200 million in there, in any event, it could go down and we'd get a bigger assessment.
A much bigger.
It doesn't matter what level you're funded at if you have a loss.
Yeah, in some ways, the more funded you are, the worse it is, because you have more money to lose.
Right. Okay.
Who cares when you lose 30% if you have, $10 in there, but you have $200 million, you're starting to talk real money. So that's actually one of the interesting things on all these funds, is that as you get more funded, you probably want to become a little more conservative. But then you're not fully funded anymore once you start doing that, because your expected future investment returns will be lower. So
Carrie, do you think so? Just this is fascinating. Actually, this is a whole nother world I've never touched. We're just talking about the OPEB funds. Do you think that the investment philosophy that we have on the trustee side, we would just mirror that?
I think probably so, or we're pretty close to that.
Okay.
One of the things as I mentioned, I would tend to think that you might want to be even more aggressive on the OPEB fund, because that is, you're just in that accumulation phase. So I think that gives you a little bit more latitude in terms of being more aggressive, but you have to be comfortable with the level of risk.
But Carrie, are we just talking about the OPEB, or are we talking about OPEB and the reserve fund for us to play an advisory role?
We're talking about both. The town meeting vote requires you to participate in the OPEB trust fund investment. I just tacked on pension reserve too, since you're being generous with your time and your, it would be helpful to have some feedback on that as well. But they both really have different objectives right now, because one we're using, and it would be helpful to get some input on, even though there's $10 million in that fund and we have 8 or 9 years left on the funding schedule, what happens when the market turns, and we probably don't want to just use all of it, but how much is prudent to keep in reserves for the next time there's a downturn?
I have to say, it seems to me that a lot of these distinctions are pretty artificial. I guess from the perspective of the the town, right? It's as if we have the 180 million invested at 67%, and then the 10 million invested at 60%. But you could look at the whole thing and say that it's invested at 66 or 65 and a half or whatever it would be. And I guess that the requirements in terms of the that the funding that the town must make, right? The funding requirement is based on the percentage funded. Is that right, Larry? So that if there were a big decline in value in the pension fund, right, then the assessment to the town would increase.
Yes.
And I understand that that the shortfall is spread, right, over a long period of time, but still the assessment would increase. And the advantage of having the pension, whatever it's called,
Reserve.
the pension reserve, is that that sort of can be called on, right? But it's all town money, right? And it's all to meet
really.
that.
The trouble is that the pension fund, which is controlled by the pension board, isn't actually, is actually in a trust, which the town can't touch. But yes, it's for the town, mostly the town.
It's for the same liability. We're trying to fund the same liability, and
and we'll ignore the fact that it's a housing authority, and we'll ignore all that stuff, right? But yes, you're basically right. It isn't exactly fungible, but the thing is that there are laws which say about how you have to be. There's a limit. You have to fund this thing by 2040. And so there's limits to how much you can spread it out. And as we are getting closer and closer to 2040, we're starting to get less flexibility in terms of changing things to be able to spread things out. So in some sense that it actually does, there is some real sense to what your argument is, but there are some technical, legal things which sort of say, no, they're not exactly the same, that it's not exactly the same, that they're, it's all fungible.
And the OPEB, there is no funding deadline, at least at this point.
There's no requirement to fund at all.
Right.
Except
but the goal is to have
bond rating, by the way, by funding significantly keeps your bond rating way up there.
And the plan is for the OPEB fund to start paying the obligation when?
That hasn't really been discussed, but as they're getting closer to fully funded.
But probably 2040.
Well, yeah, no, I don't, we haven't really, but they're just not even close to having enough money. They're like a third funded. So you're still in the accumulation phase. And that's why I'm saying you have the ability to look at it. Because the trouble with the money, like the retirement money and this OPEB money, these are in irrevocable trusts. If you end up with too much money in there, you can't go and say, we're going to use it to buy a fire engine. You can't do that. It stays only for this purpose. So my guess is that you probably don't want to wait till the OPEB gets 100% funded, because then you have more and more chance of it becoming too overfunded. And you don't really want it to be overfunded, because then you can't use it for the other purposes, right? You have an extra $100 million in there. Well, great.
Well, but then you can just slow off on the assessment, right? Because it's going to, the obligation continues to accrue.
But if you have, let's say, like 120% funded, you probably you have enough to cover you. You never have to put in any more money if you actually earn your return.
Or as long as there's no more Great Recessions or Great Depressions or. Yes.
But it could keep on growing. So, you want to walk a line of you don't want to put too much money in an irrevocable trust.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our role would simply be limited to guide the investment. Obviously, we wouldn't have any say in disbursement. I mean, on the donations, we have consistent with the charters of the funds, we have a lot of flexibility in terms of disbursements. For these two, the pension reserve and OPEB, we would never really talk about disbursements, right?
Well, we might talk about when it would be appropriate to start taking money out, but the actual, you wouldn't have a role in, voting to approve money to be dispersed.
Yeah, it would affect your liquidity requirements and therefore potentially affect.
That's fair. No, understood. So would we be held, so essentially the way we would, and this could flow into the next discussion as well, the way we want to structure this is we would get a report with 3 different pots. One is the town donations, which I know is broken out by the fund separately. And Carrie, I know you do that. There'd be the pension reserve, which we'd get a report on. And then there would be OPEB. Yeah, okay.
But it sounds like, Tim, also that there were, in addition to just the assets that are in those funds, we also have to take into account sort of the timing, right? And the status of the pension fund and what kind of assessment support might be called for from the pension reserve. And if there's been a really lousy year, then there's going to be more of it. It seems to me that there are considerations of that sort that are going to influence the investment decision that we would make.
Yeah. No, so you're pointing to actually where I was kind of going to go with this. I mean, in a perfect world, all 3 funds would have the same exact investment philosophy. We do our due diligence, but it sounds like that may not be, maybe today that would be the case just because the obligation, at least for OPEB, is so far out. But as it gets closer, are we essentially managing with 3 different philosophies at some point?
Right.
Probably at least 2.
Yeah.
Because
Go ahead, Carrie, I'm sorry.
because the pension reserve, it may be because of the need to draw on that it stays mostly liquid. And there's, so
Yeah.
my thought.
And has the pension reserve been flat? Has it been growing? Has it been shrinking? What's the trend?
So it's been growing. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has. Even taking, because we just haven't that much out of it, so it has been growing.
So the other thing that's happening here is that these funds, the OPEB and the pension reserve, are ultimately going to become the investments that wag the dog, because they're going to be much bigger than the town donations funds.
Surely the OPEB, yeah.
So we have a pretty and we've all spent a lot of time in terms of what our investment philosophy is, and it's codified in our investment policy. Is there something like that currently for OPEB and the pension reserve fund, 60% equity or whatever it is, or would that be our job?
So there is a very vague investment policy. I have been working on updating that and making it more detailed, but would certainly be looking for some input on, what makes sense, given the constraints of what these types of funds can be invested in under state law.
And Carrie, essentially, you kind of have the unilateral, and you're coming to us for help, which is great, but you as kind of the trustee or whatever the correct word is, do you kind of have the unilateral authority to set that?
So for OPEB, I am the trustee. So Yes, but the town meeting vote was specific that I should be seeking guidance from you.
Got it.
For the pension, I'm just the treasurer. So I'm not the trustee. So, you know, a slight difference, I guess, in authority, but all funds that the town holds are under the jurisdiction of the treasurer.
Got it.
One example of the differences in philosophy could be that OPEB could invest in something which is very illiquid, like, you know, the equivalent of private equity or something like that, you know, with the J curve and all that, you know, where you would never want to do that in the pension reserve because, as Kerry mentioned, that it would need to be potentially more liquid.
Understood. Is there anything else we should discuss on this one?
Not from my point of view.
Yeah.
It's really if this is helpful to you, hopefully.
Very helpful. But I don't, personally, maybe I just didn't give it much thought, but certainly this would be a significant expansion of, and granted as an advisory role, of what we do. But that's fine. I'm off the committee in May, so it's fine by me either way. But I think just as a board, we just need to think that through.
Okay. Well, I guess I can head on out, but what's your second agenda item? Just curious.
So it's tied into this one. So we've, for years since I've been on the committee, we've had the same investment advisor.
The ICMA, is that?
BNY Mellon.
Oh, okay.
And that's worked very well for a lot of different reasons. It hasn't been re-examined in, I think, 8 years. So certainly we're at a natural break point now. And I think what a couple of spotted opportunities, Kerry brought this up, can we combine this into one single RFP with the theory that maybe we'll get better service or just get a better deal out of it?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So,
Well,
Thank you, Larry.
so I think I'll head on out.
okay, any other questions for Larry? No.
I thought I was
Okay.
making my escape.
No, I think you're
We'll
out.
get him to come back when I think we may need him to come back though, Jim.
Yeah, no, I think we need to.
My martial arts for this, by the way. I do.
Yeah, you haven't seen The Last of Us, Larry. Don't worry.
my 6:30 martial arts class. But anyway, well,
Okay,
thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was interesting.
All right. Well, thank you, Larry.
Thank you. Bye. Nice meeting you.
You too.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay, before we move on to the next one, any further discussion on this? Like I said, I'm not sure if I completely appreciated where we were headed, and I'm comfortable with it because somebody in the town needs to help manage this, but it does kind of change the nature a little bit of what we do. Rick seems to be into it.
Well, it's interesting, but it's very different than trustees of town donations, right? It puts a much heavier emphasis on investments and much less on thinking through how we should be dealing with beneficiaries.
Well, in the OPEB space, it does, right? But that's not to be, condescending, but Terry's problem in a way, right? Like you're the trustee, we're just, and I don't mean that in a bad way, right? We'd be advising you, right? And then on the other fund, like you said, Kerry, that's mostly liquid, right? That's not a real 60-40, or, it sounds like it's mostly liquid instruments.
It's not now, but it probably should be, or it should be more liquid.
Right. So I mean, you're
That
kind
makes
of
sense.
like, that makes it a little easier because or one, for that 10 million, you're probably going to more liquid. On the, sorry, on the 10 million, yeah, on the 10 million. Then on the OPEB, it's more of the long term, which just, doesn't need to be matched up necessarily, Rick, to the trust, right? To the pension trust, because it's separate. So you can look at that differently. So it may not be all that different than kind of what we're doing on the trust that we're managing now.
Yeah, I don't really see the OPEB investment, the portfolio, to be much different than what you have for your trust funds, which is very similar to what we have for the pension system.
Is there a reason why maybe it's legal that we're not putting OPEB and the pension reserve underneath? I assume there's a separate retirement board somewhere.
So the under the new state law for OPEB trust, we had three options. One of the options was to just turn it over to the retirement system and have them manage it.
Yeah.
But because the retirement system is greater than the town of Concord, there are other members. The town of Concord is the major member. The Concord Carlisle Regional School District is a member. The Concord Housing Authority is a member. So the interests are similar and the constituencies are similar, but with some distinctions. And so it didn't seem to make sense to put it under the retirement system. And the other two options were either to have a sole trustee or to have another committee. And the membership of the committee is statutorily defined. And so we had talked about that more with the select board, but we had talked at this level too. And it seemed to make most sense, since you were willing to help, to go with a single trustee with receiving investment advice from you, rather than another committee, which, again, the state law said who you would put on the committee, what types of people you would put on the committee, and including, citizens not necessarily with any investment expertise, and retirees of the system whose interest is not aligned with the best interest of the municipality.
Understood.
And does the school district have its own OPEB? Does the housing authority have its own OPEB?
So Concord Carlisle Regional School District does have its own trust fund that they actively contribute to. The housing authority, I'm not sure, but their liability is very small.
So I am comfortable with it based on those parameters. And again, when he's, Larry is obviously very knowledgeable, and when we got into the discount rate and other things, that's not stuff I think we would ordinarily talk about. Once we get settled, and there's a lot of rocky water ahead of us before we get to settled, it would just be another breakout, and to make sure that, Carrie, we're aligned with you, or you take whatever advice we have and take it from there. So maybe it's not as daunting as I was afraid of, but I'm certainly open to other thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's a tiny bit different, only because I was just looking at our investment policy statement, right?
Yep.
Here, the policy is to preserve the real purchasing power of the endowment, whereas in the OPEB, it's going to be to increase the corpus of that trust.
Yeah.
Right. So it's growth versus preservation.
Yeah.
Or
I got
alternatively, it's, go ahead. Sorry, Gavin.
That's all right. I was getting a little lost as to the goal of what we were discussing, honestly, because there's such different, like your unfunded pensions versus the accounts that were like these perpetual funds and things like that. like, to me, they're just so different that I was getting a little confused as to what the goal was and who was going to do what about it. You know, I'm sorry, maybe I'm just taking a too simplistic approach to this, but I don't know. I mean, I don't look at funds that you have in your hand, how you invest them for the future versus future liability is a very different thing.
So I'm not sure if we would ever talk about liability, would we?
I don't think so. I don't think you can.
No, I agree.
Because you're managing donations, not the future expectation of receiving funds.
Yeah. But even for the pension reserve and Opeb, and there was a lot of great information there, but I'm not sure if that's what Carrie's asking us to do.
I don't think so, but that, again, I was just being silent because I wanted to learn what was happening here. But as I sit here after hearing it, I don't know if we're aligned or should be aligned with that kind of a approach to it. When you have a 6.75 kind of expectation, you have to shoot. You have to swing for the fence.
Yeah, good point.
Well, I'm not sure that it seems to me that the objective may be is to reduce the size of the net liability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or to approach full funding or something of that sort. And yeah, I hear you on the discount rate, but I think one of the things he said was that if you change the allocation, he'll change the discount rate.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I get that. And pension management is certainly not something that I do. But I do know it gets a little frightening when your discount rate is X and the market does Y, and now all of a sudden it's like gasoline on a fire. But I think that at least what I thought is that what we're discussing is a very different, what the funds are, and what the annual kind of distributions could be. Funding future liabilities, though, is a very different animal to me. But again, maybe it's just because of my lack of expertise in pension funding.
Can I ask a question here? And trust me, Gavin, you all have way more expertise in this area than I do. So I was listening to learn as well. And, I guess something I think about is if there's a time when we go forward with trying to bring this together, is there a time when you would ever want to break the funds apart, uncouple them at some point? And I don't know what that looks like. Is that possible? Does that get messy? You want to find a new advisor for the retirement, but not for the trustees funds. So just thinking ahead, if that was ever the case, what that looks like. And I think, thank you, Chris, for bringing the investment policy for the trustees, because I don't know it well, but they are different, the maintenance versus the growth piece. And we do want these to be around for forever. So I guess that's the sort of a concern I have, and I echo Gavin's thoughts on that.
So in looking around to get sample requests for proposals from other communities, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, I certainly found that communities that have recently sought proposals for investment management services for trust funds were not combining their Opeb fund or their pension reserve if they had one. So I do understand that concern, and maybe this isn't a good fit. I thought there was some benefit in looking at it again, because there may be more investment management firms that are interested in a portfolio of this size, even though it has three pieces, objectives versus a much smaller portfolio.
And that's true. You can definitely have 3 separately managed accounts, for a client. So you can do it that way. and not, combine them, Jen.
Yeah, and Carrie, I certainly wasn't, I understand what the goal was for that. And I do applaud the effort, because you're going to have, you can take a smaller fund and marry it to some other funds and get, asset management that you'd never have, based upon its own size.
Yeah.
But to that end, I don't know. I personally, as I sit here, like, and I sit there and think about, private equity firms and whatnot, it's, we're getting into an area that maybe it's a little outside the scope of what I thought we were doing.
Yeah. If it doesn't seem like a good fit, then I can go back to the select board and talk to them about that. The pension piece certainly can come out of the mix. The OPEB piece, there would definitely have to be a conversation, because when we established the trust fund and town meeting voted on it, it included a component that the trustees of town donations would provide, be a sounding board, provide advice to me as the trustee on the investment. But that was at the front end of this before we really get into it. And if we get into it and it doesn't seem like it's a good match, then I can go back to them.
So the pension reserve does feel like it's substantially a different beast. And no matter, and on the OPEB, I mean, we're advisors. I think what Gavin's afraid of is what I'd be afraid of, is that we're chasing returns, right? And not that we don't try and maximize responsibly the portfolio of the donations. I've certainly never felt the pressure of meeting future obligations. Having said that, if we can fence it off, so, we are advisors. I mean, that's what the language says. And Carrie, certainly you would always have the discretion to pull it away from us at some point as well. And the way we'd have to structure it is to Jen's point, which I thought was also a good one. Who knows what the world's going to look like, what town government's going to look like 10 years from now. It needs to be done in a way that it could be pulled away. And I think this could be done very effectively and efficiently. So if we did go forward with this, I think if we did interviews with other investment advisors, that would have to be a big part of the conversation. So, Carrie, it feels to me like we might have to think about this one for a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fine, because I would have to give it some thought as well, because I'm not sure I would want to issue an RFP for the trust funds and OPEB and pension separate.
Yeah. So
I think we could issue two, one for the trust funds and one for OPEB and pension, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure it makes sense to split OPEB and pension.
that was going to be my next question. Does that even make any sense to split OPEB and pension? Probably not, it sounds like.
Yeah, and if I had a vote, I wouldn't split those two. I would, if I had, I would do the trust funds as their own separate entity. But again, they're just so different in the way that, like, whatever your goal is from an investment standpoint, it just seems so different that to lump them all in together could lead to some fiduciary issues as to why we're doing what we're doing. I think there are plenty of asset managers that could take on a smaller trust fund type of situation that will give us personal attention on those. I mean, the pension and OPEB, those are a very different animal to me.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one? No.
I have a question, Carrie. How much of the pension fund is in private equity and hedge fund and so forth?
It is split about approximately 60-40.
60-40, 60% standard investments, 40% private equity, and
No, 60% equity, 40% bond.
but the pension now, not the pension. I'm thinking the $200 million fund.
That one is about 60-40 as well, 60-45 equity.
But my question was, how much of that is what we might consider alternative or untraditional or something like that investments?
The hedge funds?
Yeah.
It's a very small percent, 5% maybe.
See, I'm just not persuaded that this OPEB fund is ever going to be anything other than standard investments. I don't see why it has to be. I'm just not. I'm not. I just don't understand that. I mean, we could certainly make it more complicated, but I don't see why.
I think Gavin's concern is 10 years from now, rapid market fluctuations, and suddenly we got to make up ground quick. Now, obviously, if that happened to the town donations, we'd all be very upset by it. But, you know.
Yeah, like to me, they're just so different. You know, the town donations versus OPEB or the pension. Like why you don't need that kind of alternative investment allocation to town donations. But I understand why they're reaching for return in these other two, because they have an unfunded liability.
Which the towns have decided that they are going to, in effect, force the investment manager to make up their unwillingness to fund, right?
Agreed.
If we take that perspective, if we say we don't want any part of that, right? If the town wants to require the investment manager to make up for their unwillingness to fully fund this at the rate that the insurance companies would require, right? The discount rate that the insurance companies require is the rate really that they should be dealing with.
Right, but it's 2 times that.
So we could say we just don't want any part of that, which I can get on board with that.
Yeah.
So the retirement systems investment advisor is very interested in advising on OPEB and pension, and would provide a very favorable rate because he has that other business. I know of another firm that's very interested in the trust fund side of it. Neither one of those firms are interested in the other side of the business.
Yeah.
So
I'm not surprised because they're so different.
okay, I have a lot of ideas. Sometimes they're even good. So.
No, and it's what we need to look at the other side. Part of the reason why this was attractive is by combining these, do we get higher quality investment services? And I'm not just talking about somebody coming in and playing nice with us. I mean, you know, real increase in quality. I guess the question we all have is the benefits of that, is that outweighed by diverting the trustees' attention for 2 sets of money that, you know, are different. Now, Carrie, I'm not surprised. I mean, I'm under the impression there's not many towns that they might have some town donations, but certainly not to the level that we have. Maybe I'm mistaken on that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the communities that we would consider peers do have them, but certainly the vast majority of communities in Massachusetts have little to nothing in, you know, in trust funds.
Okay. Any more thoughts on this one? So I think the decision that we're going to have to make, probably not tonight, is it's binary. Do we want to take on OPEB and pension reserve or not? I think regardless if we decide not to, I still think we would want to go forward with an RFP just for the town donations piece. And I think we were all pretty aligned with that. But certainly I need to think it through, but I'm open to other thoughts as well.
I agree with it.
And I would just say that given the trend in the size of the OPEB fund, that if we decided that that was what we were going to accept responsibility for that would become the primary focus of the group, because it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right. Which is a really great point as to, I didn't know that was the focus. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
To me, it's always going to be a different animal to me.
Well,
So.
And honestly, that's not what I signed up for, or knew that this was committee was about. So it does change the dynamic of that.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I mean, I almost think if we were to take it on, it would have to be with the stipulation that the investment philosophy, at least of OPEB, we're not going to deviate from what we would do from trustees of town donations. And that if Carrie, you made an independent decision that you need to go in a different way, then that would be fine. But could we get to the question? Let's get to the benefit side. Do we believe that we could help the trust funds, the town donations trust funds, by combining this? I mean, is there that much of a benefit?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think this was just the town needed to find somebody or a committee to help, right? And this was the closest thing they could find that made sense, right? But I don't think it helps the trust funds that we oversee.
Okay.
I don't think that was ever the goal of the select board, right? Like that wasn't the rationale for this.
No, I agree. Okay. My recommendation is that we table that discussion for Carrie. Is there anything else we need to discuss on this? I don't think you can kind of tell where our heads are at right now, but.
No, I don't think there's anything else that needs to be discussed tonight. We do have a meeting scheduled next week. Do you want to, I mean, is a week enough time, or do you want to look at maybe pushing that meeting out another week or two for the sake of not having to, have 2 more meetings? Or, are you going to be ready to talk about this next week? Or
I'd be comfortable giving it 2 weeks, because I do think we need to make a decision on this for 2 reasons. One, to be fair to you and to the town. And also we don't want to hold up, if we do decide not to do this, we don't want to hold up putting the RFP on the street either. But I think we do need to make a decision. And that would also give us time, if any of us have additional questions on this, to ask you. Does that sound fair to everybody?
Yeah.
So Jim, do you want to maybe just lay out a little bit more of your thought process of how the next week or 2 weeks goes in terms of what we're doing and how the conversation develops? Yeah,
I mean, we got hit with a lot of information tonight, and I think we're all trying to process it. And certainly if we want to do it next week, that's fine, but I'll certainly want to do some research on my own. And Carrie, maybe I'd call you offline as well to make sure I'm not missing anything. I think you can tell if we were to vote tonight, my suspicion is we would vote to keep them separate. But I think this deserves, to be fair to you and to the selectmen, a little bit more thought.
Is there any place we could go to get any information that we might all find to be helpful? Additional information. I don't know what that is, but I'm just thinking. We've got Larry's input. Is there any other input that we might find helpful?
So I just mentioned, I mean, Carrie, you mentioned some of the other structures. Would it make sense for the town to create a board that looks just like this, but only deals with OPEB? Or is that not even legally feasible?
Well, it certainly is legally feasible. We'd have to go back to town meeting. I think we'd need to take another look at the statutory requirements of that committee, because they're definitely, as I mentioned, the statute identifies who needs to be on the committee. And there were some concerns about the makeup of that committee and whether or not the required people on the committee would best serve the community's interest.
Could you just manage it? Like, do you need to have somebody else involved?
Well, under the law, as the sole trustee, yes, but the additional stipulation placed on it by the town meeting vote is that there would be, that this group would provide some, serve as a sounding board, provide advice. It was pretty loosely defined, which seemed to make sense at the time. But I understand where you're all coming from. I work with this on a regular basis. So, the difference is, I don't want to say they're not apparent to me, but I was thinking about it less when we talked about this a year ago.
Yeah, no, me too. I think that this seemed like a great idea at the last meeting, and now that it's becoming real, I think it's some more concerns are coming up.
Yeah, and we have no interest in leaving you hanging out there,
Correct.
So, if we can be that group, that'd be great. But I'm just saying, personally, as I sat here through the last hour, and I was like, whoa, I don't know if this is where I can really help anybody.
Yeah.
So maybe if you agree, this is not what you signed up for, maybe I could put together something that would further define, or we could talk about, what you might be willing to do that would be within your comfort zone. And then I could bring that back to the select board, and the select board could say, yes, that's within the scope of what the town meeting vote was, or no, it's outside of it, and we probably need to go back to town meeting.
Yeah. So
it was very loosely defined.
Yeah. So Rick, that's kind of where I was going in terms of further information. Is there, certainly I think we'd all be comfortable if advice means that Carrie has all the information about how we're investing the money in donations, and she can feel free to copy that, not copy that, however she wants. I think my sense is none of us want to have to track this against liabilities going forward. And my sense is that there's some, the town was trying to thread a needle on this a little bit. And if there's a way to do it that frankly doesn't really impact us, I'm happy to do it if it's consistent with the intent of the select board.
I'm wondering though, I'm wondering how the pension group really does it, right? Whether they're really thinking about the matching that target rate of return, or whether they're just saying, we're going to do our best. And if it doesn't do well and there's a big loss, then the town's going to get a bigger assessment. And that's on the town. That's not on us. We're here trying to deliver a kind of the same kind of thing that we're trying to do. We've got I can understand that they're functionally different, right? Because we have controls in the donations area that the pension group does not. We can adjust the rate of distribution that we're making, right, to try to preserve the real value of the investments. But I'd be very surprised if the investment committee for the pension fund is really thinking hard about the liabilities and the extra assessment that they're going to impose on the town if things don't go well. But I'd really be surprised.
So I can provide some insight because I am a member of the retirement system board, and our discount rate for many years was 7%. We just dropped it to 6.9%, and our portfolio is designed to come close to that, but not to meet or exceed that. And we're not, people are not losing sleep over that. You know, I think our intent is to bring the discount rate down maybe to 6.5%. But there's only one retirement system in the state that has approximately 200 retirement systems that uses a discount rate below 6%. So it's, yeah.
Well, I guess here's my, I mean, just that little discussion there, like I couldn't imagine volunteering for a board and the first thing you do is, what's our discount rate? I'd have an aneurysm, you know? I'd just be like, well, okay, that's enough. Let's just invest the funds we know we have and try and get the best return we can. But when you're funding future liabilities for retirees, there's a fiduciary responsibility of that is much different than town donations to me. And maybe I'm alone here, but I don't know.
No, I don't disagree. I think, Carrie, that your problem is that you've got people who are taking this really seriously, and if you take it really seriously, if you take the fiduciary responsibility really seriously, then you have to think about the obligations to the retirees.
Yeah, and for me at that point, it may be a conflict. I may not be able to do that with my position at work.
So I agree with all those points. And the only way I would ever get comfortable is if it's our advisory services are defined as you can copy our investment strategy if you want.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having discussions about why we decided to do one thing versus another. And if someone wants to mirror that, that's great.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I hear that a 60-40 is a conservative portfolio, I disagree.
I'm with Gavin.
I'm like, that's not.
I would agree. We have one member on the retirement board who would invest 100% in equities.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no,
So I think bottom line where we're going is we don't want to have to change the investment philosophy. We need to remain focused on the investment philosophy for town donations. I am very sensitive, and Gavin, to your point, Carrie, we don't want to leave you out to dry on this thing either.
Yeah.
And I think there are a lot of reasons why the town decided to do this. At least that's the indication I'm getting. You know, if we could ever, the only way I could see us doing is if we define, we're not doing anything different, but feel free to copy us, and we don't take accountability for this. That's fine by me, and maybe there's reasons why town leadership would want to do that, but I don't think we can put ourselves in a situation where we're actively managing a portfolio with a substantially different purpose. I guess that's the fine point I want to put on it. Now, if we fulfill the intent of what the town wants by language, and maybe the idea was, hey, we really like what these guys are doing with their investment strategy there, and you know, to fulfill the statutory requirement, we want to be able to copy it. I think that's fine by all of us, but we're just getting nervous. And Linda, I saw you just popped on.
Yeah, I've been with you all the way. May I comment?
Please.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm impressed with the way you've worked through your discussion on all of this, because, you know, there is a serious fiduciary responsibility here. Interestingly enough, one of the first things I wrote down was, is this going to require a change in your charge? And that essentially is what you've been working your way through in terms of your discussion. And the other question that I have at this point is that, Carrie, when you talk about the retirement board, you know, making some decisions about the discount rate, are they not relying on outside investment advisement as they're making those decisions?
Yes, and also advice from the actuary who has recommended, and Larry Stone is the actuary for the retirement system as well, who has recommended dropping the discount rate somewhat, not, not suggested a particular target, but to reduce that.
Yeah. So the reason I asked that question is that it, in some ways, what the fact that they do have these outside advisors specific to retirement kind of accounts sort of supports where you've come down in terms of responsibility that you may not want. Does that make sense in terms of what I just said?
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
just,
because then we're in the mode of, we have to approve not just the investment counsel we're getting, but we have to approve the actuarial advice that we're getting.
correct. Yeah.
We're purchasing that in effect.
Anyway, so I just think your instincts and and the way you've processed this intellectually just makes sense in terms of wherever you're ending up, and you should trust that, I guess.
Thank you.
Sort of where I am right now.
Thank you. So, Carrie, you can kind of tell where this is going.
Work.
No, give
Thank
it a couple weeks. Let it sit for a couple weeks. Carrie, I actually would like to see the language that the select board or the town meeting approved in terms of, and I think you mentioned it's very loose. Because again, we all want to help, but I think what you're hearing is, I think the board, the trustees would likely be unwilling to take on a separate charter that we think this would require. Yeah, I can circulate that to you. I can tell you, I was looking at it a couple of months ago, and it was even more undefined than what I had remembered it to be. So I will send it. It's probably not going to be particularly helpful, but I think that's a discussion that after you make your decision, that I can take to the select board and have a conversation and, point out the reasons why when you got into it, it really didn't make sense. And could we look at doing something different?
I think that's probably prudent. Again, if in your role as the trustee of OPEB, you can say, we advise because you have access to all our financials and you see how we're investing the other side, and that fulfills the intent, then that's certainly your business. I think we'd all be fine with that. But as far as actively managing this as part of one fund, unless anybody has any objection, I kind of feel like we've ended up at our decision.
Yeah, I agree with Jim.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. So Carrie, if you want, we can nail this however you want. If you want us to think about it for a week, that's fine. Certainly I'll be thinking about it, but at this point, it might make sense to tell the folks who need to know where we're going.
Okay. All right. So do you want to still meet next week for the quarterly meeting, or did you want to push?
That's fine. That's fine by me. Well, if anybody has any thoughts, it was already on my calendar, so.
I do have one. I'm happy to meet then too. I do have one question about the RFP, because it seems to me, Carrie, that the RFP that you assembled was perhaps focused on the OPEB with all of the, or do all the requirements in terms of advising municipalities apply in the case of the donations endowment as well?
Yeah, I would have to go back and probably make some revisions, because there are likely some things that are included that are not needed if it's just the trustees. If it's just the town donations funds.
Could you make a quick run at that? Because I still believe that, just talking about the trustees, that my opinion is we should still go forward with that process.
I
I did
agree.
have some questions about it, which maybe we table that for discussion next week. Particularly since if some of the stuff I had questions about would come out. I was impressed by kind of the process that was put in there, and certainly just doing that just for our $8 million is going to be a time-consuming process. It looks like we'll have to do interviews, we'll have to do separate ratings, and that's all good, and that's what we all signed up for. But Carrie, if you could do another run at that, I feel like we're making you do all this stuff, but you know, hopefully it's just a delete job so that it's just kind of the minimum or what makes sense just for the town donations.
Yeah, that's fine. I certainly can do that. It probably would be helpful if I could have just a little extra time. You know, I don't know that I could do that for next week.
Okay, well, in that case, maybe we should push it back a week then.
Yeah, back it up.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take a lot of time, but I do have some work still just to prepare the regular agenda items for you, so.
So would everybody be okay if we push next week's meeting back a week so we can give Carrie a little bit of breathing room here? Yeah.
I want to be clear that's Groundhog Day that we're talking about.
You have to ruin everything, Rick.
That's all done by the morning anyway.
Right.
No, I'm just thinking it might repeat. That's what I'm concerned about.
So, but back to that process. So Carrie, if you were able to get an updated copy of that a couple days beforehand, is it appropriate for us to send questions to be much more efficient with our time? Can we send you questions? I guess we would have to CC everybody.
No.
You can't CC everybody.
Ah,
To me directly, but not copy everybody.
okay. So my recommendation is, what I'll certainly do is I'll go through it and I'll send you the questions directly, Carrie, if everybody else could do that as well, just so we could be efficient in kind of looking at that.
So unfortunately, Groundhog Day is not a good day for me. I scheduled, Linda, the audit meeting that I agreed to. I may have to have Mary run that meeting for me because I have a friend having surgery that day, and I am likely his ride to and from the hospital. So
As long as we stay away from February school vacation, you know, I could, if you want to do like,
Yeah, there's one more week after the 2nd. There's the 9th. I mean,
Yeah.
I could do either the 2nd or the 9th.
me too.
the 9th is good for me if it works for everybody else.
Okay.
Good for me.
Jen, you're good?
I can do the 9th. Yep.
Rick?
That's okay for me.
Okay.
Great.
And again, when Carrie sends out the updated RFP in the couple days before that, I would just, in the interest of time, we should all just go through it. Like I said, I certainly have some questions.
Mhm.
You know, my intention is never to let these meetings go past 8:45, which I failed every time.
You have two.
Yeah, you got 2 minutes.
Okay. And anything else, Carrie, you want us to discuss?
Nope.
Okay. If there's somebody you want, two things. If there's somebody you want me to talk to about this to kind of reflect our discussion here, I'm happy to. The other thing is, given just on the trustees, could you send me the name and phone number of our current manager? I forget what his name is. Because I feel like I should probably give him a call just to say, hey, for these reasons, we're probably heading to put this out to bid. I would hate to surprise him if he does attend the meeting in 3 weeks. Does anybody have any objection if I reach out separately to the manager just to let him know where we're going?
Nope. I think that's a good idea.
Good idea.
I think it's a good idea too, because I was going to do it. So.
Well, I don't want to steal your thunder.
That's even a better idea.
But no, I'm happy to do it. Okay. And with that, anything else we should discuss? No? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All right, in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Good. Linda, thank you for helping out.
Oh, thank you. I just listened to what you were saying.
It always helps to have another voice in the room, so. Okay, Carrie hates us all now, so we just all need to live with that, okay?
My favorite committee.
You won't tell the others.
Okay, I think I'm good. Then thanks, everybody.
All
All
right.
right, great. Good
Good
night.
night.
See you soon.
Good night.
Thank you.